This is RF, and you're listening to Country Lunch. Let's get back to the last part of our interview with Paleo Mountain Man and Budcat7.
So
I know
again,
there's a lot of
officially,
them. I've seen a lot of them.
officially it's Korea, but I think unofficially it's the northeastern part of the United States. Because here you find dolmens, perch stones, sheeted stones, and Jimmy can tell you that many of the large stones on his property were the foundations for these things were prepared, and then the stone itself was lifted and put on top of these things. And some of these stones weigh,
And
several tons. And
and
how
nowadays,
did they do that?
all these years later, we find a lot of dolmens. The examples that are remaining, we find them in isolation, and dolmens are very seldom, I would think, ever in isolation. The surrounding area is filled with other things. A dolmen is a place. It's one point that lines up other points. That lines up other points, and it goes from micro to macro. And if you have one point that lines up to another point, um, if you did that on the earth, what you've done was change something. You've made a change on the earth. You've done something. And if you can create a sacred balance in the place you live by lining up stones and creating walls that have a purpose, not just to divide spaces. What they do is they have, like Dave likes to say, well, there's an administrative center in the wall, and there's a spiritual center, and there's this and that. And there is, and you can see it as you walk along the wall if you think about that. They also do divide spaces, but not like private properties where there's squared in. There'll be a long wall separated by several acres, then another long wall, open-ended walls. And the west side of the wall would be the living space, and the east side of the wall would be the burials. And when the sun rises, and you'd have all your alignments on the east side, it made a big difference in the feeling of the property, the east alignments. And then you go across the wall on the other side with the west alignments, and you have a dolmen that sits and watches the sunset. And it's lined up with the eastern alignments behind the wall. And you separate these two spaces through geometry, a sacred geometry. And that's the nature of the people we're trying to see here. They did these things. They built mounds, they built earthworks, if you find a dolmen, look around, you'll find something else. Look north, look south, look east, look west. Just find an alignment. And there's people out there doing this. And
Like Brian Gigliotti.
like Brian,
The
Brian,
walls, Jimmy, the walls may be following magnetic lines. They may be,
oh, they
some of
certainly
the walls
do.
may be following magnetic
Oh,
lines
yeah.
from the earth.
Dave,
You know,
where I am, I'm going to explain this. It's surrounded by two rivers. It's high up. It's about 12 or 1300 feet above sea level. It's about 950, 60 feet above the Black River and the Connecticut River, which it looks down on. It faces. You can see east and west. It sits right on top of the ridge that looks east and west, and it abuts the rivers into a cliff. And where I am is the perfect area where you can see the western horizon and the eastern horizon. If you were to cut all the trees down, you could sit on the wall or stand on the wall or look through a hole in the wall, which there are tunnels in the walls, sighting tunnels, and you can see both horizons. So they had sighting tunnels through both sides. But not only was it an astronomical calendar and instrument, it was also separating the earth, where you lived and where you buried. And where the burials are now,
and also
you can
grew.
still
You had
feel
the
it.
burial grounds, and you had where they grew as well, where they grew their food.
On the
So
west side of the wall, they grew all their food. They had their
west
living
side,
spaces.
right?
They ground up their
With
food.
the deck.
They
Right.
produced things on the east side of the wall. Everything was spiritual. Things were placed on the ground spiritually. You didn't put a stone just didn't lay on the ground. It was there for a purpose. On the other side of the wall, the
Well,
west side, is where you lived and where you did your business of living. And there was a difference. And if you start seeing the people that way, and you start walking through other sites thinking that way, you'll start seeing stone. Stones were shaped. A lot of these giant stones in the woods were shaped, and you'll see them, and they were placed so they look. You can walk several feet in one direction around one of these giant megaliths, and it'll look a lot different because of the angle. And they were very into angles, and you might be looking at the wrong angle. If you walk just a little bit to one side, you'll see a different angle, and you'll see a whole glyph in the wall or in the stone that you hadn't seen before. And they were into shadow and relief, and even the time of day depends. I find the best time of day is the evening when the sun is at a low angle, looking at stone walls and things like that. Not too
but
bright.
not everywhere in the walls. It's just certain places where you have what we call these art walls or message walls, or a combination of the two.
Right.
The rest of the wall can
Very
be
special
very,
walls.
very simple. But then you come up to these areas where it's, as I say, it seems like a mosaic. Most of the
Yeah.
wall is built with this rather large stone, and then you come upon these art wall areas that have all this field stone and all sorts of flat stones and negative space and all these kind of things. And think about it. Think about the healing properties of the wall. They're following magnetic lines of the earth, and they have quartz crystal built into the wall. Think about the the potential healing properties of a wall that's built along the magnetic lines that contains quartz crystal. So
I
that
got,
should be telling you something right in there. And that's why I say there's a positive energy coming from the walls. It's not a negative energy. It's
positive.
a positive energy.
It's benevolent.
I want to dispel all the sort of creepy New England stuff and everything. If you're creeped out by the walls, there's something wrong with you.
No,
Because
just watch my videos. Watch
yeah,
the images.
that's all.
See if creepy people, cannibals, could make images like that.
Right.
You couldn't. You have to have some quality of life inside of you, and
Yeah.
quality appreciation
The
for beauty
stone
and art.
walls themselves,
They're
the
beautiful.
stone walls themselves are an indication
They're beautiful.
about how much these people cared about.
They're
They
beautiful.
cared about each other. They cared about their life. They
They're
took care of their children.
That's right.
They did art. They were spiritual.
That's
The,
right.
the notion that these people were
And-
cannibals
And they
killing
traveled the
other
planet in their ships.
people, nonsense. Nonsense.
Right, Dave? They
They probably had no external enemies anyway. It was just one complete civilization, and anything was going on with them.
It was worldwide for sure, and they had their people in different regions were different, like they're different cultures, and
That's right.
they're
They had
culturally
different
different.
styles.
And
Hence
the people
the
here
different
were very
styles.
ancient, and they had all the skull types that everyone talks about, and they showed it in their images. I mean, why would it be like that if it didn't exist sometime in the past?
And if they didn't care, they didn't have a high level of culture. People with high levels of culture tended not to be cannibals.
Yeah,
know.
you couldn't exist as a culture if you were. You would fall, and you'd cut all your trees down and burn all your lime, and you'd live in your own
And
filth.
kill everybody.
And kill everyone.
You
you couldn't survive you couldn't survive for very long. And these people, all evidence is they survived for a very long time, and they got to a very high level of artistic, of cultural, of spiritual evolution that we just don't see. I don't see it. I don't see anywhere you can find a high level of art and creativity in a stone wall, in the earth around you, the way you place things. It's not just a grid, it's a purpose. It's the nature of nature. And Dave says it's healing. Well, it is. it can heal you of many, many, many things, and it all starts with your perspective. And I say that because your perspective changes the way you think, which changes. If you believe you can be healed because you can imagine it, just put your imagination towards that, and you will get the things you need. They may not be
And
what you want, but you will get the things you need.
that's what people should really be taking away from this discussion, from
That's right.
today's discussion on the radio. The walls aren't creepy. They aren't negative. They're a positive energy.
They're not
And
creepy.
I think if people want to get in touch with their positive energy, they should spend some time among the walls and get healed by the walls, like Jimmy and I did. You know, we
Sure.
both have our own healing stories about the walls, and I think that's important for people to take away from this conversation.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna wrap it up about there. And geez, I think I found one of the keys that you use in your research is time. It it's 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 part of a key because if you look at something, you can only see at a certain level. If you look at it over time, you get through the levels and you figure out how the pieces of the puzzle go together more. Because, like you say,
Absolutely right.
everything tells a story, but you can't get the entire story unless you do have to take your time.
Yeah, I'm on the radio. Excuse me.
And
Whatever. I don't got time to talk to you about it.
and yeah, and it's looking into it. Same with we were talking about if they did transport themselves around here and there. We can't do that because we're in our known world at this time. But the more we look into it, the more we realize and are told, or we realize how things happen, the further we can step into what is.
Your imagination.
Right. Well, beyond imagination.
You know what I like to say is, how far does your imagination go? Can you go farther than your imagination? Because you can only go as far as your imagination will take you. Try to go farther than that, and you do that by perspective, changing your perspective, and you can do it in a stone wall.
Okay, we're going to sign off for today. I'm going to get back with the regular programming. And
Thanks, Dave.
I'm talking with Paleo Mountain Man, and your website is?
Paleo Mountain Man
And on YouTube?
on YouTube.
And Budcat?
Stonewall Research, Budcat 7. Just type it in and you get to my channel on YouTube.
Great.
And I'll show you all the ancient art that they created in their stones.
All right. And, okay.
And I'll try to explain it to you, maybe.